Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's release of the results of the Nation's Report Card 2013 Mathematics and Reading Trial Urban District Assessment. I'm Cornelia Orr, Executive Director of the National Assessment Governing Board and moderator for today's event. The National Assessment Governing Board is a bipartisan organization created by Congress to set policy for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or NAEP, also known as the Nation's Report Card. As many of you already know, NAEP is the largest ongoing nationally representative assessment of student achievement in the United States. We are excited to release today's report card on the Trial Urban District Assessment, or as many of you know we call it, TUDA, which provides in-depth results from 21 urban public school districts, tracking 4th and 8th grade student achievement in mathematics and reading over time. The TUDA results are an important indicator of how students are performing in our nation's largest school systems. These systems face a concentration of the challenges that all schools grapple with to some degree. This report card expands on the 2013 NAEP national and state findings released last month and provides comparison of achievement in the urban districts with their states, with large cities generally, and with the nation as a whole. The TUDA results are available in the Nation's Report Card new online format, which makes it easier than ever before to locate the data that matter the most to you. Throughout today's presentation, we encourage you to join an ongoing Twitter conversation using hashtag NAEPTalk and broaden the discussion of the results you will see presented today. Today we have a distinguished panel of experts who will share their thoughts, reactions to the report card, as well as share the data. I'll briefly mention each of these speakers, and then our webinar producer will review today's event logistics. Our first speaker will be Jack Buckley, Commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics. He will present the report card findings and give a demonstration of the new online report format. Our second speaker will be Florida State Senator Anatary Flores, who is also a member of the National Assessment Governing Board. Finally, we will hear from Michael Casserly, Executive Director of the Council of Great City Schools, who has been a valuable partner with the Governing Board in an effort to enlist urban school districts to volunteer for TUDA. Following Michael's remarks, we will have a question and answer session with our speakers. Before we begin, Jennifer Jakes, our webinar producer, will review the logistics for using the WebEx system today. Jennifer?
Thank you, Cornelia. If you have technical difficulties during today's webinar, please refer to your confirmation email or call 866-229-3239 for assistance. Our speakers will answer questions during the Q&A session later in the event, but attendees are welcome to submit questions about the report card results or speakers' comments throughout today's presentation. So don't wait. At any point, simply type your question into the Q&A panel on the lower right side of your WebEx screen. When you submit your question, be sure to choose the option in the drop-down menu that says All Panelists. Please include your name and organization with all questions. Note that live closed captioning is also available in the bottom right corner of your screen in the Media Viewer panel. Click the X at the top of the Media Viewer if you'd like to close the captioning panel. And now back to you, Cornelia.
Thank you, Jennifer. Now it is my pleasure to welcome our first speaker. Jack Buckley is the Commissioner of the National Center for Education Statistics. Before becoming Commissioner, he was a Professor of Applied Statistics at NYU. He is well known for his research on school choice, particularly related to charter schools, and on statistical methods for public policy. Jack served as Deputy Commissioner of NCES from 2006 to 2008. He also spent 5 years in the U.S. Navy as a surface warfare officer and nuclear reactor engineer. He also worked in the intelligence community as an analytic methodologist. I do believe this is Jack's last release event for NAEP, as he will soon be transitioning to a new position with the College Board. I just would like to say publicly thank you, Jack, for your service to the country and for your work with NAEP. After his remarks, Jack will provide a demonstration of the new report card website. That means there's a chance that some of our attendees may experience a slight lag in the webinar due to your own personal bandwidth capacity. If that happens, please bear with us. We encourage all of you to try out the new website for yourself at the conclusion of today's webinar. Many of you have already done that when we released Reading and Math, so you are probably quite capable of this, but Jack will offer a demo for those of you for whom it's new. Jack?
Well, thanks very much, Cornelia, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here one last time to release the results, this case of NAEP's 2013 Trial Urban District Assessment for Mathematics and Reading, or as we affectionately call it, TUDA. So TUDA assesses the performance of public school students at the district level. As Cornelia mentioned, it's a collaboration among the National Center for Education Statistics, as well as the National Assessment Governing Board and the Council of Great City Schools. Participation in TUDA is voluntary, and in 2013, 21 large urban districts from around the country were invited to participate, and all 21 did. And because the NAEP assessments are the same for the nation, the states, and our urban district participants, we can use NAEP as a common yardstick for comparison. So this slide shows a little bit about how the Trial Urban District Assessment has expanded over time. These first 6 districts shown here volunteered for our first TUDA assessment, which was reading in 2002. In 2003, we added 4 more districts for a total of 10. In 2005, we added Austin. In 2009, we had a large expansion, 7 more districts. And in 2011, we added Albuquerque, Dallas, and Hillsborough County, which brought our total to today's 21. So our samples for the 2013 math and reading assessments consisted of public school students at grades 4 and 8. And the samples ranged in size from about a little under 1,000 to almost 2,500 students per district per grade. This variation in sample size among districts is because, of course, the districts themselves differ quite dramatically in size. But for all of our districts, regardless of size, we have samples that provide reliable results for comparisons, both over time and among the districts. And as always, in NAEP, we report student performance in 2 ways: scale scores and percentages at or above the achievement levels. The NAEP scale scores indicate what students know and can do, and for math and reading, we have separate scales, which each range from 0 to 500. The achievement levels were developed by the National Assessment Governing Board, and they set the standards for what students should know and be able to do. For each subject and each grade, the Governing Board has established standards for basic, proficient, and advanced performance. And ultimately, the policy goal is to have all students performing at or above the proficient level. In this presentation, I will, for the most part, be comparing the district's performance to the national average score for public school students and the average score for public school students in large cities, which we define here as those with a population of at least 250,000. So we developed this large city average for comparison purposes because the student populations, as you know, of our large urban districts in the United States tend to vary somewhat from the national average. And as always, today when I'm comparing scores and any other NAEP results in the following slides, I'll only discuss differences that are statistically significant. In the figures that follow, I'll be denoting that using asterisks and up and down arrows to indicate differences that reach the statistical threshold of significance. So first, looking at the big picture, 10 of the 21 TUDAs recorded a scoring increase or decrease in at least one subject or grade combination in 2013 as compared to 2011. So all 10 are shown here along with the results for public school students nationally and in large cities. So just to reiterate, this slide shows trends in mathematics and reading at grades both 4 and 8 between 2011 and 2013. So at the top of the figure, you can see that scores for the nation improved in mathematics in both grades 4 and 8 overall, and in reading at grade 8. And this is indicated here by the arrows pointing upward. Looking at the district participants, Atlanta, for example, had an increase in grade 4 mathematics. Baltimore City had an increase in grade 8 reading. In the District of Columbia, scores increased for all grade subject combinations. In Detroit, the average score fell for grade 8 math, and in Houston, it fell for grade 4 reading. A single asterisk here marks a score increase that was significantly different from the increase, if any, for the nation as a whole. And the double asterisk marks any increase or decrease that was significantly different from the statistic for large cities. So, for example, in Atlanta, Chicago, and the District of Columbia, the increases were larger than the national and large city increases at grade 4 mathematics, and the same was true in DC in grade 8 reading. If there's no arrow, scores did not change significantly. And for the 11 districts that are not shown here on the slide at all, it's because there were no significant changes in scores between 2011 and 2013. So now we can take a closer look at changes for scores in various disaggregated student groups within the districts. And again, we're looking here at changes between 2011 and 13, beginning with mathematics, grade 4. So 4 districts here had overall increases at 4th grade in math: Atlanta, Chicago, the District of Columbia, and Los Angeles. In all 4, lower income students, those eligible for free or reduced price lunch that is, showed an increase. In 3 of the 4, all except Chicago, scores increased for black students. And in Los Angeles, scores increased for white, black, and Hispanic students. In Jefferson County, the overall score did not change significantly between 2011 and 2013, but as the downward pointing arrow shows, the average score for Hispanic students in that jurisdiction did decline. If we turn now to grade 8 math, here we see 3 districts had higher overall mathematics scores: Charlotte, the District of Columbia, and Fresno. And in all 3 cases, only lower income students had higher scores. In Cleveland, while there was no significant change overall, we see that the score for white students did decline. And in Detroit, the overall score did decline, as well as the scores for black, Hispanic, and lower income students. If we turn now to reading, 4th grade, we see here that DC and LA had higher scores overall in 2013 than 2011, although none of the student groups disaggregated in DC, as shown here, have exhibited an increase. In Los Angeles, lower income students did show improvement. In Houston, we see the average score for 4th grade reading declined, although there were no statistically significant changes for any of the individual or disaggregated student groups shown here. And finally, grade 8 reading, we see that 5 cities had overall score increases, and in all 5, scores increased for lower income students. In the District of Columbia, scores increased for white, black, and Hispanic students as well. In Milwaukee, while there was no score increase overall, we did see improvement for the subgroup of Hispanic students between 2011 and 13. So now let's move over to compare how the urban district participants compare to large cities. So when we look at the results for just 2013, so now we're looking at average scale scores, not the increase over time, we see that a number of districts had, in fact, had higher scores than the large city average. So Austin, for example, had higher scores than the typical or the overall large city average in both mathematics and reading at both grade levels. And this was true for Charlotte and Hillsborough County as well. Boston and Houston had higher scores for grade 8 math, while Jefferson County had higher scores for both grade 4 and grade 8 reading. Miami-Dade, New York City, and San Diego all showed higher scores than the large city average for grade 4 reading. A number of districts also had scores in 2013 that were lower than the large city average. In Albuquerque, the grade 4 reading score was lower than the large city average. In Atlanta, scores in grade 8 reading and mathematics were lower than that average. While in Dallas and Houston, the grade 4 and 8 reading scores were lower. And in 9 of the districts, scores were lower than the large city average in both grades and both subjects. We can also now look at that large city average and compare it to the national average for public school students. So this is looking now back over for a decade at the longer term. What we see here, just for an example from grade 8 mathematics, that since 2003, scores for both the nation and the large cities have improved. In 2003, for example, the score for the nation on average was 276. which is 14 points higher than the large city average that year of 262. By 2013, both groups had higher scores, and the gap had fallen to 8 points because the increase for large cities was larger than the increase nationally, so they improved at a faster rate. If we simply look at the score increases for the nation in large cities since the first assessment in 2003 and the first TUDA reading assessment in 2002, so math was started in 2003 and reading in 2002, we can see increases for both in all 4 grade subject combinations. And we see that the increase for large cities was larger than that of the nation as well, again, in all 4 cases. This bar chart shows mathematics results in green on the left and reading in blue on the right. Improvement in student performance since the early TUDA assessments can also be seen by looking at the percentages of students scoring at or above the basic achievement level and those scoring at or above the proficient achievement level. So the bars here show the percentages of large city students who were below basic, at or above basic, and at or above NAEP's proficient for mathematics and reading, grades 4 and 8, in the years 2003 and 2013. So for example, if we take at the far left there, the bar for mathematics in grade 4 in 2003 shows that 37% of students were below basic, 63% were at or above basic, and 20% were at or above proficient. In 2013, the percentage below basic had fallen to 25%, while the percentages at or above basic and at or above proficient increased to 75 and 33% respectively. The next set of bars shows the same percentages, but for grade 8 mathematics. And again, we see the percentages at or above basic and at or above proficient were higher in 2013 than in 2003. Further to the right, the 4 blue bars show similar results for reading at grades both grades 4 and 8. Now let's look at score changes for the individual participating districts, in this case in mathematics, since the first TUDA mathematics assessment. And again, we'll start with grade 4. So since 2003, over the last decade, as we see here, grade 4 scores have increased for 9 of the 10 participating districts. Remember when I showed that map, not every district was participating back in 2003. And we indicate this by the green bars here on the chart. So as the headline tells you, in 6 of the districts, the size of the increase was larger than the 7-point increase for the nation as a whole. And these larger growth districts range from a 24-point increase for DC to a 13-point increase in grade 4 math for Los Angeles. Here, a single asterisk indicates that a score increase was significantly different from the national, while a double indicates that it was significantly different, again, from the large city increase. So take another example. The 24-point increase for the District of Columbia was larger than both the 7-point national and the 11-point large city increases. This was also true for Atlanta, Boston, Chicago, and San Diego. On the other hand, the 6-point increase for Charlotte was smaller than the large city increase, and the 2-point decline for Cleveland, of course, was smaller than either the national or the large city increase. If we turn to 8th grade math, we actually see a similar story. Here, 9 of the districts, again, had higher scores in 2013 than a decade earlier in 2003. And the increase in scores nationally was, again, 7 points. Here, 7 districts had larger than that national 7-point increase, and these gains ranged from 23 points for Atlanta to 13 points for San Diego. In 3 of the districts, Atlanta, Boston, and LA, the increase was larger than the 14-point increase for large cities, too. In New York, the 8-point increase we see over the decade was smaller than the large city increase, and in the case of Cleveland, the score change was not significant. It was smaller than either the large city or the national increase. If we flip over to reading, grade 4, we can see here that 8 of the 10 districts showed increases when we compare back to 2003. So for 5 of these, the increase was larger than the 4-point increase for the nation, ranging from 18 points for Atlanta to 8 for Boston. And in Atlanta and DC, the increase was also larger than the 8-point average large city increase. In Houston, the score change was not significant and was smaller than the large city increase. And in Cleveland, the 6-point decline was, of course, smaller than the increase for the comparison groups. And finally, for grade 8 reading, 9 of the 10 districts had higher scores in 2013 than they did a decade previously. And 3 of them, Los Angeles, Atlanta, and San Diego, had larger gains than the 5-point increase for the nation over that period. These increases for Los Angeles and Atlanta were also larger than the 9-point large city increase. In the case of Charlotte and Boston, the 4-point increases we see here were smaller than the large city score increase. And Cleveland shows a 2-point decline, which is statistically different from the increases at the large city and nation overall. So that's just a quick look at the results from the 2013 TUDA. As always, our 2013 TUDA Mathematics and Reading Report Card website provides a great deal more information, in particular extensive profiles of each of the 21 participating districts. And actually, I'd like to now transition to providing a demonstration of some of the features of our interactive electronic report. Okay, so using our new interactive digital report card, we can explore the NAEP TUDA results in 13 in much greater detail. So very similar to what we showed you in the 2013 NAEP nation and state results just a few weeks ago, these TUDA results are reported primarily now on this interactive website rather than a thick printed report. And as we hope you see here, making use of some of the latest technology, our website will help you explore the results that interest you the most using your desktop or tablet computer. So we've organized the results from the 2013 assessments to address 3 questions. What is TUDA? Are districts making progress? And how do districts compare to other jurisdictions? If you start here on the home page, you can first view a 90-second video summary of the TUDA results and also take a brief video tour of the new website. You'll also notice several static menus that appear on each page, such as About the Assessments, where you can look at information on the sample, participation, inclusion rates, and other of the operational aspects of the program. You can move over to Download the First Look, where you can download the First Look Highlights Report, cleverly named. You can also look at Download Infographics, which allow you to view infographics showcasing district results in mathematics and reading. And on these pages, we have shareable icons, which allow you to share content both through email and also social media. If you scroll down, you can access complete results by using the menu at the bottom of the page. So for example, under Summary Data Tables, you'll find tables summarizing the national and state sample sizes, participation rates, and information on students with disabilities in English language learners. You can also download additional detail for average scores and achievement levels for states and jurisdictions in this section. And just like a few weeks ago, in the case of TUDA, these data are all available in common spreadsheet and PDF formats. If you click on Custom Tables, this opens a menu that allows you to customize the data you want to download. You can toggle drop-downs for each subject, grade, and a selection of variables like gender, eligibility for the National School Lunch Program, location or type of school, and which statistic you want, average scale score, for example, or percent at or above the various achievement levels. And lastly, on this page, there's an executive summary. Under that tab, you can see high-level results for select districts for both math and reading. And these results include a look at which districts have made gains since 2011, which student groups are making progress in the various urban districts, and how students in urban districts across the country are performing. If we back up, we can now look at the first major question: what is TUDA? So this provides an overview of the trial urban district assessment, accompanied by this map that illustrates when each district began participating in the assessment. It's the same thing I showed you in the slides, but it's interactive and a bit more dynamic. So for example, you can click any year below the map to see which districts joined the program in a given year. You can select district demographics to learn how the demographics vary among the TUDAs. So just select a grade level to see what % of students in each district, for example, are eligible for the National School Lunch Program. You can organize these findings by percentage or by alphabetical order. If you scroll down, you can see how the composition of districts varies by, say, race and ethnicity. To answer the next question, are districts making progress, the website provides additional information that helps show where this progress is happening. So for example, 8th grade mathematics, 3 of the 21 districts scored higher in 2013 than in 2011, which we denote here by the yellow triangles. 16 districts had no significant change, those are the gray circles, and 1 district had a decline, here a blue triangle. You can also compare the 2013 results to any previous assessment year by using the drop-down menu. So for example, if you want to see the gains Los Angeles made in 4th grade reading since the first assessment, select Reading 4th grade and set the comparison year to 2002. For detailed score information for any district, just click on the district on the map, and here you can see that 4th graders in Los Angeles have made a 14-point gain in reading since 2002. On every page of the online report, you can easily switch to view any subject and grade by using the drop-down menus. If we scroll down a bit, you can actually also view score changes across the districts. And once again, you can filter the data by subject and grade and change the comparison year for a broader view of how district scores have changed over time. Now, to see how different student groups are performing, we can make the next selection here, student group changes. So this section explores how various disaggregate student groups performed on the TUDA assessments. Selecting reading or math to see which student group shows you which groups improved in which subject. And if we scroll down, you can see trends in average scores for the selected groups, like race, ethnicity, gender, family income, again as measured by eligibility for the National School Lunch Program, and more at a glance. And for a given example, if we click on one of the trend lines, you can actually get the underlying data to see the average scores. And the chart just below that shows score point changes by student group from the assessment year of your choice. So flipping back up to the last key section, how do districts compare with other jurisdictions? This enables you to compare districts to large cities, as we did in the earlier slides, right? That is cities with 250,000 residents or more, to the nation, and also a new feature to each district's home state. So you can get started here by selecting, again, a subject and grade level, a comparison jurisdiction, and what measure, either average scores or percentages at or above the basic or proficient achievement levels. And then you can click on any district on the map to see how it compares to the jurisdiction that you choose. If you scroll down, you can see these data in a more detailed bar graph. For example, this one showing the percentages in each district below basic, at basic, proficient, and advanced. The next section introduces a new feature that lets us provide a deeper analysis of how districts compare to their home states. So here you'll see a new graph. We've introduced this here for the first time. We didn't use this even in the 2013 National and State Interactive website. We're calling this one the bubble chart. So each of the light blue circles here represents a TUDA district in the state specified on the left. The size of the bubble here is proportional to the state's total student population that's in that district. So for instance, Fresno is very small, the circle there is quite small, because it represents only 1% of California's total student population. The darker blue bubbles are the proportion of students who attend schools in districts other than the TUDAs in that state, shown in each row. The position of each bubble on the horizontal axis indicates its average scale score. And we use the orange plus sign here to represent the reported overall mean scale score for the state. You can also notice there a green line that represents the overall score for national public students. But if you want to, you can change that to show the average score for public students in large cities nationally. So this allows us to see, for example, that the score for 4th grade math in the nation is about the same as that in San Diego, and higher than California, Los Angeles, and Fresno. You can also get a better picture of the statistical differences by selecting a comparison from the drop-down menu on top. So for instance, if you select significantly different from home state in the Show Statistical Differences drop-down, you'll notice that some bubbles fade to the background while others remain highlighted. The ones that remain highlighted are districts whose scale score average is statistically different from the overall home state's average. So for example, San Diego scored higher in fourth grade math than did California as a whole, while Los Angeles scored lower. You can also click through the years and show how that comparison plays out over time. So for 8th grade reading in 2003, for example, we see here that we know that San Diego wasn't different than California because it doesn't appear in the chart. But by 2005, we can see that they made gains that caused their score to be significantly different than the average for California. Scrolling down, the next section allows you to compare NAEP results of the large cities against those of the nation. So you can choose to view the comparison either as a bar graph or a trend line. Either which will show you that the large cities consistently score below the nation on NAEP, but are making much larger gains each year, as we mentioned earlier, effectively closing the gap or narrowing the gap between the two. If you scroll down, you can see that these scores can be broken down by various student groups that we've been talking about, including race and ethnicity, gender, and National School Lunch Program eligibility. And below that, you can further cross-tabulate these groups by additional subgroups. The final section here contains detailed profiles of each district. These district profiles provide a portrait of each district's performance in context by subject and grade. Results are also shown for the large city, the district's home state, and the nation overall to facilitate relevant comparisons. The drop-down menus will help you create customized profiles to highlight the data you need. You can see district scores displayed as a trend line over time, and below that as a bar graph showing the comparison to the other jurisdictions. Clicking on any of these bars, you can see the scores then broken down by achievement level results. The online report also highlights score gaps between selected student groups in each district and how those gaps compare to our 3 jurisdictions. And finally, the remaining 2 graphs provide detailed information on inclusion rates for both students with disabilities and English language learners. So I've only given you here a quick overview of the results for 2013, and this new online 2013 TUDA Mathematics and Reading Report Card, as you can see clearly, allows you to explore the TUDA results in a wide variety of innovative ways. And as always, I urge you to take advantage of this new resource. And lastly, in closing, I'd like to thank, as ever, all the students and schools who participated in these assessments, but also all of the both government staff folks here at NCES, the members of the National Assessment Governing Board and their staff, and our wide contractor family who all work day in and day out to make NAEP possible, and our fantastic team. Thank you for 3 great years.
Thank you very much, Jack. The website certainly has an advantage for everyone over the printed reports, and we're very grateful to the work of everyone to make this possible. Our next speaker is Senator Ana Terry Flores. She represents District 37, including parts of Miami-Dade County, in the Florida Senate. Senator Flores serves as the Republican Majority Whip from 2010 to 2012. She also served as a Florida State Representative for District 114 from 2004 to 2010. Senator Flores has received numerous awards for her legislative service, including the Public Education Leader Award from the Florida Association of School Administrators, and recognition as Legislator of the Year from the National Association of Social Workers. Additionally, Senator Flores is president of Doral College, a recently established accelerated college program. And she is a member of the National Assessment Governing Board and serves on our Reporting and Dissemination Committee. Thank you for making time for us today, Senator. We look forward to hearing your perspective.
Thank you so much, Cornelia, and thank you for all of you who are participating on the call today. The nation's report card really has been an invaluable measure of achievement for more than 4 decades, and it gives the country the best independent analysis of student performance. The addition of the TUDA, the Trial Urban District Assessment, which assesses students in some of our largest districts for over a decade now, has proved to be a much-needed tool that is vital in our changing educational landscape. As a state lawmaker from Miami-Dade, which has been, of course, a proud TUDA district member since 2009, I really see the benefits of having the NAEP data at the local level to measure against our local tests and get a more clear idea of where we really are and where we need to be. It really is especially important to see trends, especially over the long term, for students in our urban, diverse school systems that often have unique challenges. It's good to see that compared with 2003, for example, lower percentages of students in large cities are below the basic achievement level in both mathematics and reading at grade 8 and 4. Over that decade, the percentage of students in large cities performing at or above the basic and proficient achievement levels were higher across both subjects and grades. In addition, from what we saw in state and national NAEP results released last month, Hispanic students have shown increases in grade 4 and 8 math and grade 8 reading nationwide since 2011. And I think that's something that's very important for us to note. Of course, as we know, the number of Hispanic students is growing, in some cases exponentially, across the country. And so our nation students are going to be looking like Hispanic and African American students more and more over the years, and it's important to know that we're seeing progress in those demographics. For Miami-Dade, this particular TUDA report offered a bit of good news. The district's grade 4 reading average was higher than the large city average. However, it is notable that compared with the 2011 and 2009 TUDA assessments, we saw no statistically significant changes among both subjects in both grades. So while we didn't suffer declines, we did remain stagnant. And I think seeing this should prompt us in Florida here to look at what we can do to improve academic performance at these levels. I'm very proud, of course, to be a resident and legislator in Florida, which since 1999 has been a leader in various areas of education reform. We really were ahead of the curve in using data to draw conclusions and then make relevant changes in our education system. Algebra 2, for example, is now a high school graduation requirement. We have a statewide reading initiative for Florida's public schools in conjunction with community groups and volunteer organizations with the goals of having every child able to read at or above grade level and ensuring that each student receives a year's worth of knowledge every school year. We have very high expectations for our students in Florida. We continue to increase academic standards comprehensively, and there has been some criticism when state test scores initially have gone down after these standards have been increased. However, our students here in Florida continue to meet and exceed expectations, and academic achievement continues to excel around our state. I think we really are primed to meet the challenges ahead. Our TUDA neighbor to the north of Miami-Dade, that being Hillsborough County, has demonstrated incredibly impressive performance in this 2013 report. This county is among the highest performing districts in math and reading at both grade levels. And as you can see, Miami-Dade's grade 4 reading average is higher than the large city average. And I really see that as a direct link to our education efforts. Florida requires that students read at grade level by 3rd grade. Yes, that can be a very high standard, but it's an achievable one. Looking at the positive grade 4 TUDA news from Miami-Dade confirms that we're on our way to meeting our goals of having every child read at grade level. And that's where I see TUDA as a resource. It's the truth teller and a challenge to those of us down the line, whether we're policymakers, educators, parents, and the students themselves. Those of us who are involved in educating our students, we can use TUDA and NAEP as that truth-telling serum that we all need sometimes. We can't be complacent. We need to see valuable data such as what TUDA offers and how that can best inform the best decisions that we make then as policymakers. I think here in Miami-Dade, we can use this performance trend to push ourselves to improve even more. When we conduct TUDA again in 2015, I hope and fully expect to see statistically significant increases from Miami-Dade. As the education landscape changes, we're going to continue to strive to change for the better. Thank you all again for allowing me to be part of this conference.
Thank you, Senator Flores. Our final speaker today, Michael Casserly, has served as the Executive Director of the Council of the Great City Schools since 1992. As head of the Council, Michael's accomplishments include launching a research program on trends in urban education, leading the first national study of common practices among the nation's fastest improving urban school districts, and convening the first education summit of big city mayors and superintendents. Michael has also been instrumental in enlisting urban school districts to volunteer for NAEP's Trial Urban District Assessment. Michael, we look forward to your insights.
Thank you, Cornelia. I'm Michael Casserly, the Executive Director of the Council of the Great City Schools. Before I start, I want to thank Cornelia and her team at the National Assessment Governing Board, John Easton at IES, and Jack Buckley and Peggy Carr, and their superb team at the National Center for Education Statistics for the great work that you do on this very important project. Thank you. Also, a very special thank you to Jack Buckley for his years of service. Your commitment, partnership, and expertise has just been outstanding, and we will miss you. As you probably heard from Jack's remarks, these 2013 results mark the 10th anniversary of our first round of both reading and math scores in 2003. That 10-year period gives us a long enough trend line to know whether urban public schools are making real progress or not. Now the facts are in. Between 2003 and 2013, the large city schools improved their fourth grade reading performance on NAEP by 8 scale score points and narrowed the gap between our schools and the nation by 32%. At the 8th grade level, our reading scores improved 9 points, and we have narrowed the gap with the nation by 34%. In math, we've gained 11 scale score points in the 4th grade and narrowed the gap with the nation by 38%. And at the 8th grade level in math, we've gained 14 points and narrowed the gap with the country by a whopping 43%. In all, our gains have been significantly larger than the nation over the last decade, and they are evident however one looks at the data. We've made progress since 2003, and we've made progress since 2011 in 8th grade reading and 4th grade math. We've made progress raising average scale scores. We've made progress increasing the percentage of students scoring at or above proficient. We've also made progress increasing the percentage of students scoring at or above basic achievement levels, and we have decreased the percentage of urban school students scoring below the basic level. In all, a number approaching 100,000 more of our large city 4th graders score at or above the proficient level in math than they did 10 years ago, and nearly 50,000 more of our 4th graders score at or above the proficient level in reading than a decade ago. If you look solely at any 2-year testing cycle, the results are sometimes less conclusive, and they often lead observers to conclude that urban schools are not making any headway. But if you stand back from the individual trees, you will see a forest that is growing taller and getting stronger. Several of the individual trees, however, deserve special recognition for their growth since 2011. The District of Columbia Public Schools improved in all 4 grades and subject combinations, the only city to accomplish this. Los Angeles improved in 3 of 4. Fresno improved in 2, and Atlanta, Baltimore, Charlotte, Chicago, and Dallas improved in 1. In addition, several other cities have scores that are comparable to or above the national averages in at least one subject and grade, including Austin, Boston, Charlotte, Louisville, Miami, San Diego, and Tampa. And other cities held their own in the face of substantial budget cuts and the inclusion of many more children in these assessments. In general, the cities have devoted substantial energy to improving the quality of their instructional programs and the rigor of their standards, and it is hard to believe that these efforts aren't reflected in the numbers we are seeing today. Remember that 10 years ago, we started this initiative to help us in 3 ways. 1, we as urban school systems wanted to demonstrate that we were fully committed to the highest academic standards for our urban children. 2, we wanted to be able to compare ourselves with those that share many of the same challenges. Finally, we wanted a way to gauge our progress and evaluate our reforms in ways that the current 50-state assessment system simply does not allow. In general, we are very encouraged by the new results, but of course we are not satisfied with them. We know we need to accelerate. We know that our racial gaps are still too wide, but the results give us confidence that urban education is and can be substantially improved. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you, Mike. Now we will respond to attendee questions during an online question and answer session. Our facilitator for this segment will be Amy Buckley. She will direct the questions to the appropriate speakers, so now I'll turn it to you, Amy.
Thank you so much, Cornelia. If you have questions about today's report card results or speakers' comments, please submit them now. As Jennifer mentioned earlier, we ask that when you submit your question, you choose the option in the drop-down menu that says All Panelists. Please remember also to include your name and organization when typing your question. We're so pleased to have a full roster answering your questions today. As was mentioned, John Easton, IES Director, is here, as is Peggy Carr, Associate Commissioner with NCES. So they are available in addition to Senator Flores, Mike Casserly, Jack Buckley, and Cornelia Orr. We have received several questions from our webinar attendees already. We'll try grouping some together on similar topics and hope to pose as many as possible during the allotted time. Questions that are not answered directly or indirectly on the webinar will be answered later via email. Our first question is from Felicia Smith with Fort Smith Public Schools. She would like to know what notable gaps between races and which grade levels ranges struck us. Jack, obviously there's a lot of rich information on achievement gaps with the TUDA data. Could you discuss which ones were perhaps notable or stuck out the most?
Sure. It's a great question. I mean, as we showed you with the website, you almost need that much time just to go through and look at all of them across the various TUDAs. I think one that really jumps out is actually not a race ethnicity gap, but it's actually looking at families from lower versus higher family income, which is something that we can see that gap continues to be very large across all the districts that participated. So when we look at the large cities nationally, that gap, the socioeconomic status gap, ranges, depending on grade and subject, from 26 points to as much as 34 points. And the gaps between race and given, say, white and black students or white and Hispanic students can also be quite large in many of these cases, but they vary a great deal more among the districts because the demographics are just so different in some of these students.
Great, thank you. And actually, Krishanu Sengupta with Stand for Children asks a similar questions while we're talking about gaps, and wanted to focus specifically on the free and reduced lunch and non-free and reduced lunch, as well as with African American and Hispanic versus white students. Is there anything regarding those subgroups that you didn't just mention that you'd like to note?
Sure, and let me just clarify before I do. So one of the reasons why I keep coming back to this large city statistics is because the TUDAs, we do have, of course, all these results for the individual participating districts, but what we don't do is compute any results averaging over the TUDAs because they're not, they're a voluntary sample. They're not representative of the large cities, which is why we have this separate large city statistics. So I apologize if it sounds like I'm answering a slightly different question. We really have sort of two sets of results. We can talk about comparing large cities on average to the nation, and then we can just look within participating large cities, but we don't have a quote-unquote TUDA average. So with that caveat, if we look at the large cities nationally, that free lunch eligible, free or reduced price lunch eligible versus not gap actually increased in fourth grade in both reading and math. And again, looking at the large cities, the white, black, and white Hispanic gaps did not change statistically. They didn't narrow, but they didn't increase either when we compare back to 2011. If we look at some of the TUDAs, and I won't take all the question time here to go through every one of these results. For example, in Boston, that gap, the free lunch versus not free lunch gap, increased in Boston in math at both grades. In Chicago in reading and math, but just at grade 4. In Detroit in math at grade 8. And in D.C. in all subjects and grades except grade 8 reading. We actually saw that gap between the school lunch eligible and non-eligible, or vice versa, increase. In Jefferson County in grade 8 reading. If we look at the white-black gap, it increased in math at grade 4 in Chicago and Milwaukee. In the white-Hispanic gap, we actually saw in this 2-year period an increase in Jefferson County, but just in grade 4. I'll stop there because it'll take me the rest of the time just to rattle through the rest of the results.
Great. Thank you so much.
Just one addition that I'd like to make to the last two questions is that with the new data tool that Jack unveiled today, one thing that is possible that I would urge people to do is to take a look at not just the difference between races in the academic performance on NAEP or the difference between free and reduced lunch eligible and not eligible, but to look at the interactions of the two, because sometimes you'll see gaps open up by race, but they'll close within race if you're looking at, say, white free and reduced price lunch eligible and African American free and reduced price lunch eligible. So there's a number of different ways to look at this gap that will sometimes add additional information to your understanding of what the gaps are and what they're not.
Great. Thank you so much, Mike, for that. Our next question is from Stephanie Brown. She would like to know if more urban districts will be added to TUDA. Cornelia, could you address that for us?
I would be glad to. At the August board meeting, the board discussed our budget constraints that we have and TUDA representatives, and they made a recommendation that we would include 21 districts moving forward. So at this point in time, we don't have plans to add new districts to over the 21. And if our budget situation were to change, of course the board would be interested in it. But right now, we just don't have the funds to support more districts than 21.
May I add to Cornelia's comment and indicate that we sure wish that the budget would allow for greater expansion for the TUDA program, because so many cities across the country have found this an invaluable part of how it is they gauge their progress and teach their children, that many school districts would love to be a part of this initiative if the additional funds were forthcoming.
Thank you, Mike and Cornelia. Our next question is from Sarah Rosenberg with the Center for American Progress, and she's wondering when the TUDA background survey results will be released. Jack, can you start us off there?
Well, we could do today if that's soon enough. They're available now. Actually, on the interactive report card, you can see the district profile page actually includes a small selection of results, but the complete set of results are available in the NAEP Data Explorer, so our tool that lets you build your own tables and models, and they all go live at the same time, so they're up now.
Great answer. Thank you. Our next question is from Frank Barnes with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools. He'd like to know how the standards assessed in NAEP compare to those in the Common Core vis-a-vis Smarter Balanced and PARCC. And in reading and math release, we saw some interest about comparisons with Common Core. Cornelia, can you address how the standards in NAEP are or are not related to those of the Common Core?
I'll be glad to, Amy. Thank you. It's a great question and one we get quite a lot. And the governing board's framework for its assessment program preceded the development of the Common Core state standards, but were used in that process. So in pulling together standards documents for review, the governing board frameworks were very much used. And in fact, in the reading language arts area, they are very similar, including the amount of reading literature or reading for information, text, and also the writing framework was relied on heavily. As those common assessments get built out, it will be possible for us to do a comparison or an alignment study between the two tests because the Common Core state standards are not the same thing as the assessment frameworks that we use for NAEP. So we will wait until the test specifications and definitions and items and tests are administered for the Common Core before any closer look at the alignment is done. But we are expecting that to have a very positive outcome.
Thank you, Cornelia. Our next question is from Mark DeCandia with the Kentucky Department of Education. Mark asks, Is it statistically appropriate to compare NAEP TUDA results with NAEP state results? Are there cautions to be aware of when comparing state and district results? Jack, could you answer that, please?
Sure. It's a great question. So it is proper to compare TUDA results with those results from their home state or any other state. And in fact, we feature comparisons like that, as I showed you on the interactive report card with those bubble charts. It is important to know, there's a great flag here, something to remember, that in the case of comparing TUDA results versus their own home state, so Atlanta versus Georgia, you need to remember to use some sort of a correction factor to the significance testing to account for this sort of part-whole issue, right? The fact that the TUDA is part of the home state data. So anything that we're showing here in terms of significance on our tools, on our website, in the NAEP Data Explorer, in the table we produce, or in the printed reports, actually does apply a correction factor. There's a literature on what to do, but we pick a fairly standard method. And we apply that factor consistently for all of our part-whole or dependency significance testing. If you're going to do that yourself and not rely on one of our tools, then I would encourage you to talk to somebody that's somewhat familiar with that, just to make that adjustment.
Great, thank you. Our next question comes from James Turner with Daniel Alexander Payne, CDC. James states, in many education discussions, the entire onus is put on the schools. However, they can only be successful if there is strong parental support. How do we regain the support of parents? Cornelia, can you start us off discussing perhaps what the governing board is doing regarding parents, and then Senator Flores and Mike, if you want to add from the local level what you're seeing regarding parent engagement after, that would be great.
Thank you, Amy. It's a great question, and one I think that all of us in education want to do our very best for. So the governing board began about a year and a half ago, perhaps even longer, to think about how we could help parents gain more access to the NAEP information and use it as a tool in evaluating their own child's progress. And so that has led to a national summit that we're having on January 13th, where we will be reaching out to nationwide parent leaders. And this will be live streamed, and you can hear nationally recognized experts discuss assessment and educational improvement and the parents' role in that, and how these efforts can make a difference in student achievement. U.S. Secretary Arne Duncan will deliver the keynote address, and you can register for this on our website, the National Assessment Governing Board website. We also have another initiative to help develop assessment literacy among parents, students, policymaker groups, and there isn't a product planned yet, but we're well underway with that. But certainly the governing board has recognized the need for more information in the hands of parents about what NAEP data reveal to us about our national school system and making it more easily accessible. I think the two recent websites that have been rolled out for the NAEP data on reading and math for states and now for urban districts will be a great help in helping parents navigate this massive amount of information on NAEP.
Thank you. Senator or Mike?
Yes, thank you. I think I'd first echo what Cornelia mentioned about the importance that the NAEP board has placed on parent engagement. I've seen that just over the last couple of years that I've had the opportunity to serve on the board, that awareness around NAEP and its importance is something that has increased greatly. To answer the question specifically, of course, there's still so much more that all of us can do as community leaders, as policymakers, as parents, quite frankly. There's always so much more that we can do when it comes to parent engagement and parent involvement. Of course, the challenge is how does one mandate that? And if you mandate it, do you really get quality involvement? What we do see is that we know the direct correlation, and so it's just important for all of us to highlight the significant role that parental involvement makes, And we see that different states and really local communities are doing unique things to be able to encourage that parental involvement. Certainly in Florida, we do all that we can to encourage parental involvement. In charter schools, which of course are not mentioned in TUDA, but for example, parental involvement is heavily encouraged and in some cases required. There's a major public policy debate when it comes to requiring parental involvement. But as we continue to shine the light on data and on the important role that parents involve, the hope is that parents will continue and be increasingly more involved across the country.
Just a quick remark. I agree with Cornelia and the Senator about the importance of parent involvement as well. And in urban schools across the country, it's often a continuing challenge, and we often need to do a lot to improve the confidence that parents have to be involved in school activities. So it's a never-ending process that we value a lot, and as the National Assessment Governing Board and the developers of NAEP create tools to improve awareness of NAEP, we are going to be very eager to distribute and disseminate those, hopefully in multiple languages, to parents in our communities.
Great, thank you very much. Our next question is from Stephen Miller with Green Bay Area Public School District. He would like to know, when will school-level data be available? Jack, could you clarify for us what data is and is not in the nation's report card?
So NAEP does not report results at the school level because it's a sample-based survey of what students know and can do, broadly defined, but very clearly prohibited by law from reporting individual or student-level results. And we don't, at present, go down below these 21 trial urban districts are our smallest unit of reporting. So unfortunately, not in any time in the near future.
Thank you. Our next question is from Lisa Jones with the Learning Sciences Research Institute. She would like to know how many of the schools that participated in TUDA are turnaround schools or have been restructured. Jack, is there that information available?
No, so we did not collect in the background questionnaire about, that the school administrators filled out. We did not collect any particular information about the school's status in any of the current department's policy initiatives. And so that's not part of this file. Of course, the Department of Education aggregates from the state's reporting a great deal of information about that. So for the state's own state assessment results, we have released detailed information where you can look at all the various categories of the School Improvement Grant Program and look at how every grade within school, every subgroup actually within each of those grades, how those subgroups have improved or not over time. For grantee and non-grantee schools, including the turnaround category. But within the NAEP program, no, we don't actually have that.
Thank you very much.
Go
ahead, Mike.
Yeah, the questioner might also be interested in a study that the Council of the Great City Schools is working on of SIG schools in the big city school districts. It will not be tagged to NAEP results, but we're hoping to do a pretty detailed study about progress among turnaround schools, at least in the major urban areas, and that should be available sometime this spring.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mike. And while I have you, a similar question. Melissa asks, does the report capture any of the strategic initiatives the large districts have undergone in order to improve and affect change? Clearly not a cause and effect relationship. However, what are you hearing and learning in terms of the initiatives going on in the cities and how they're improving their achievement? And perhaps to follow on with you, Senator Flores, if you could talk about what's going on in Miami.
Is this a question for me?
Yes, sorry, Mike. Yes, if you can speak to strategic initiatives going on in the urban districts and what your impression is of their impact on NAEP scores and improving achievement?
Well, as I mentioned in my remarks, the big city school districts for some years now have been involved in a variety of initiatives to improve the quality of instruction in our urban classrooms. These initiatives often look different from place to place, but in general, they've involved such things as raising our standards, overhauling our curriculum and scope and sequence documents, revisiting the materials that we use to ensure that they align with the standards that we are raising. Also, the professional development efforts, the coaching efforts, and the technical assistance that a lot of our school districts are using are all part of the picture in terms of what's behind some of the gains that you see in this report. In general, I think the urban school districts' broader strategic emphasis on raising standards, improving the quality of instruction, and boosting the overall focus of our professional development efforts is at the heart of the improved scores in many of these cities. Each individual initiative will look very different from place to place, but all of them at their core have a focus on improving the quality of teaching.
Thank you very much. Anatari, did you have any perspective in terms of initiatives going on in Miami?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can tell you that our superintendent here over the last couple of years has put a very, very focused view onto our lowest performing schools. And first, of course, let me back up and say that the only reason that we know that we have, what schools are unfortunately performing worse than others is because we have that rich data in Florida that we can look at. And using that data, the superintendent has really been able to focus on the poorer schools, on the schools that need most improvement, and has gone in every school and done a turnaround plan for each one of those specific to the school. In some cases, it's bringing in a new administration. In some cases, it's tinkering with the curriculum a little bit. In some cases, and if the funding is available, it is adding an extra period in the day. Some cases, it's changing with the scheduling and the way that the courses are offered. There are a variety of different things that are being done here, specifically in Miami-Dade County, that I think is starting to reflect in our national, in the national data, and is definitely reflecting in our state data. And that's really what each state and each superintendent has to do, is use this data and go and I think surgically look at each case and really focus on, what can we do, what has to be done in order to ensure that all students are at the same level, and that some of these gaps that unfortunately we still see persist, what can we do to narrow and eventually eliminate those gaps? And I think that really has to be done on a case-by-case basis at each school with the timing and funding resources as necessary.
Thank you, Senator. We actually have had about 4 or 5 questions submitted related broadly to this topic, trying to understand how districts have made gains and how some have not. Francine asks, is there qualitative explanation for the progress reflected by the quantitative data in the report? Perhaps we could, for the people who are asking these questions, are there qualitative or related reports and studies to urban progress that any of the panelists can point these individuals to, recognizing that qualitative information is not contained in the NAEP report?
One thing that I would point the listeners to is a study that we did about 1.5 years or 2 years ago called Pieces of the Puzzle, where we did a very detailed analysis of why some urban school districts improved faster on the National Assessment of Educational Progress than other districts did, and what was the difference between the instructional practices of those districts and the districts that did not see as much headway. And in general, what we found was, related back to the last question, what we found was a mixture of strategic initiatives, goal settings, strong vision, focused leadership, and the like, and then a series of tactical and programmatic steps that the individual districts had taken around program areas, professional development, technical assistance, and the like, turnaround efforts that kind of filled out the broader strategic question. But you might want to look at that report, which I think may be the only one of its kind around why some urban school districts improve or not improve on NAEP.
Thank you. Jack, John, or Peggy, are there any additional resources at the top of your head that we can point to that perhaps the department has done on this?
John may wish to weigh in on this because it's, of course, a question that cuts across almost everything that IES does, at least within K-12 education. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's one of the fundamental questions in education research. So, of course, over the years, there are very many studies that have been done of varying quality trying to answer this question. Mike's study, of course, is one that I'm familiar with. We're very pleased with it because it uses our data, but also does it in a sort of a strongly methodologically valid way. John, do you want to talk anything about what else is going on at IES that could speak to this?
Well, I agree that the council study of improving urban districts is one of the most comprehensive out there. I think some individual cities have done a good job on looking at their own reforms. New York City, Chicago, for example. IES is funded for its evaluation. Division is funding a study.
John, excuse me, could you get closer to the microphone so we can hear? Thank you.
Sure, we're doing a little logistics here. Sorry,
Thank you.
Sorry about that. I was sitting way at the end of the room. I think a number of the large cities themselves have done some very excellent research on improvements, and I point to places like New York City and Chicago. The council study, however, is the most comprehensive that I know of that looks across a number of cities and looks really closely in depth and this qualitative sense of what's going on. IES is sponsoring a number of studies of the school improvement grants that includes qualitative data. So we, at the school level, we expect to be able to get some insights into large-scale school improvement.
Thank you, John. Our next question is from Kristen Huff. She would like to know how the sample from DC in TUDA differs from the sample in the national and state results, if at all. Jack, if you have the microphone back, could you address the sample definition for DC as a TUDA versus what's available in the national data?
Sure, absolutely. So DC, of course, is an unusual case compared to most states. The TUDA population as defined for this study is the DCPS, the District of Columbia Public Schools. The population definition for the main NAEP state results is the entire District of Columbia. So that would include, theoretically, eligible for sampling would be the charter schools that are non-DCPS, and actually private schools as well. The state results would not include the private schools. DC, in the national results, a private school in DC would be eligible to be sampled as part of the national sample, but we wouldn't be reporting those within the state results. So to try to answer this question more concisely, state results for DC are the entire district public school system, including the charters. The TUDA results for DC are just the DCPS schools.
Great, thank you, Jack. Our next question is from Patricia Jalen. She wants to know, how do charter schools show up here? I believe the senator addressed earlier they're not included, but Patricia wants to know, are they counted? And if not, is there information on how many students left district schools for alternatives? She's wondering if there are characteristics of the student bodies that have changed that are identified in the data. Jack, is that information available?
So a couple nuances here. So the definition, again, these are urban district, the population definition, these TUDAs are urban districts. If the charter school, a given charter school is part of that district's calculations as reported under No Child Left Behind for computing AYP, adequate yearly progress, then they would be eligible to be sampled here, and if they're not, then they're not. So if they're either an independent charter school that is its own district, or under some other chartering authority is in a joint charter district or something like that. So it actually depends on which of the districts that we're talking about. That said, depending on the quote-unquote market share or the relative share of students in charter schools, for some of the TUDAs, we actually can report out separate scores for the charters versus the non-charters or the traditional public schools in those districts. And for others, they are included in the sample, but they're not sufficient precision to report them out differently. So it really does depend on which of the jurisdictions. To the second part of the question, this data collection here for NAEP is not intended to provide general information about trends about charter schools across the country. We do at NCS have a variety of other data collections, including both the Common Core of data and the other components of a system called EdFacts that actually would provide aggregates by subgroup state assessment scores for every single public school, including charters for every year that we have them back to at least 2002. Many more years if we're looking at population. So we have a great deal of information and could compute many of those questions, but this particular NAEP study is not designed to do that.
Thank you, Jack. Our next question is from Winston Brooks. Winston comments that TUDA recommends that not more than 5% of ELL students be excluded from the TUDA exam. In Albuquerque, the exclusion rates were more like 2%. So Winston is wondering if our exclusion rates were closer to the 5% mark, would Albuquerque have seen greater gains? So an interesting question about the relationship between inclusion-exclusion rates and the scores. Jack, is that something you can comment on?
I can start. I have a feeling that Cornelia may want to weigh in on that as well, because there's a couple of things going on, right? So there's a clear policy, so to back way up, right? The stated policy of NAEP, as given by the governing board and fully endorsed over here, is to try to include and assess every student for whom we can conceivably possibly get an actual valid and reliable score. And of course, we rely on the states to help us with that because of the participation. So one way to answer that question would be, I don't know, because Albuquerque should be only excluding the students that actually legitimately need to be excluded because they're not accessible for NAEP. And so to exclude more students, to me, that means you'd actually have to change the population. You'd have to have introduced a different mix of students with different requirements or needs to be excluded. And in that sense, really, the score shouldn't change. Now, if one were to go and just arbitrarily exclude additional students, I imagine that would have an impact on the scores, but then we wouldn't have a good sample in that case. So it's kind of a hypothetical that's hard to pin down, because really, if you're following, when we follow our procedures and when we work with a state or a district, they should only be excluding the students that really should be excluded.
Yeah.
So also,
An additional, I'm sorry, go ahead, Cornelia.
I just wanted to make the questioner aware that several years ago, back in 2010, the governing board appointed some expert panels to think deeply about this question. Of concern to the governing board was the irregularity across states, and I suppose the question is about the TUDA districts, but as to who takes the test and who doesn't. And this inconsistency seemed to be casting some doubt on the comparability of these sub-level reports for states and districts. So the governing board set some goals. We established some goals, and they are very parallel to the goals you find under the No Child Left Behind Act. That is the goal of 95% of all students in the state or the jurisdiction participating. And within the subgroup classifications, that is within students with disabilities and with English language learners, the board established a goal of 85% of those students participating. so that only those students who have the most severe cognitive disabilities would not be participating in the NAEP assessment, and students who had been in the country taking English less than a year would also be excluded and not included in the assessment. So, as Jack mentioned, it is the cooperation with the various jurisdictions and schools that are sampled that makes the final determination of whether students are included or not included. But the governing board's policy was intended to make the comparisons across states more similar by assessing a similar population across states. Mike, I think you wanted to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one note to your remarks. You were absolutely right that there was a point at which the exclusion rates had become an issue not only for the general public and the press in terms of their confidence that what they were getting in the scores was fully representative of student attainment in the districts, but individual participating districts were beginning to question the comparability of one city to another when they had vastly differing exclusion rates. So a place like Los Angeles often was unsure about whether or not it could compare itself to a Houston, which had differing rules for exclusion, and it was in some ways undermining the confidence that people were having. So I think the board actually made a good policy move on this front, and you now see substantial reductions in the exclusion rates across almost all of the TUDA participating districts. So our participation rates now, when they used to be in the double digits in some cases, are now right around the national average at around 1 or 2% in most of the TUDA participating cities.
Thank you, Mike. And actually, Cornelia, that is the last question that we have for today. We're ready to conclude.
All right, thank you, Amy. I also thank you all who participated and asked such engaging questions. That was a wonderful question and answer session. I hope that today's events will inspire you to use the new website and learn more about these most recent results. You can find this at www.nationsreportcard.gov, and Nations Report Card is all one word with no spaces, and you can take a deeper look at the data. Mentioned several times today were the profiles of the 21 districts, and you may be interested in just finding the one or two that you're interested in and printing those out. On the Governing Board's event website, you'll find links to the report card, the news release, the speaker statements today, and in a few days you'll also be able to find an archived version of the webinar. Be sure to stay up to date on all of the information today by following the Governing Board and NAEP on the social media. I've already mentioned hashtag NAEP Talk, and the conversation will be continued there. And I'll just mention once again our Parent Summit that's being planned for January 13th. You can register for this summit on the Governing Board's website. It is available by live stream, and you do not have to attend in person, but I would encourage you to register so you can get the link to the website that is going to be available. I want to especially thank Jack, Senator Flores, and Michael for being with us today, and of course, thanks to all of you for participating with us. We look forward to our next release.
Cornelia, if I might, I believe John Easton has one more thing to share with us.
Thanks very much, and thanks for everyone today for this session. Very informative. But I do want to take this moment to think back to the first day of TUDA 2002 and recognize the courage of the districts that volunteered to participate. These districts were sure that they were going to look badly on NAEP, and yet they went ahead with this because they thought the information would be valuable for them. And I think now we can look back 11, 12 years later and see that they were right. So I think we should applaud the districts for stepping up to this and using this information as best as they can. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's webinar. You may now disconnect.